Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Low Production Value Sphere podcast, which is shot as per usual from my terrorist hideout in the Druze region of Syria. And I have with me Clare Morell, who's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a wonderful, wonderful think tank with which I was affiliated with many years, and where everybody who works there is amazing. Uh, and there's many things we could talk about, but Claire, you recently wrote a book, and it's called The Tech Exit: A Practical Guide to Freeing Kids and Teens from Smartphones. Reading my notes, I have terrible handwriting. Practical Guide to Freeing Kids and Teens from Smartphones. Okay, like one of the things that I really like or that I'm intrigued by is you're a policy person, but you didn't write a policy book. There's some policy stuff in there, but that's not the main focus. So why don't we start there?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. So, actually, in my policy work for the last 4 years, working to protect kids from online harms like pornography, social media, and smartphones, I would get asked a lot by parents for my professional advice. What should we do? When should we get a smartphone? And I would tell them, my research has convinced me I'm not going to be giving a smartphone and social media to my own kids. But I recognized I had young kids. I hadn't navigated the teen years myself yet, so I didn't have the credibility to explain how to do this. And they would say, well, what's a resource you recommend that shows us how to raise our kids smartphone free? And I didn't have a good book to give them. And I actually then was kind of determined to find one. So I set out reading every book on parenting tech and technology really that I could find. And I found them all deeply disappointing. They would talk about how bad these harms were for kids. They were pretty accurate on the harms. And then the best solutions they could offer parents were, so set screen time limits, put parental controls in place, and talk to your kids about the dangers of technology. And all of the research I was staring at was showing me like the time limits weren't working, and the addictive design of the tech was really the time limits were no match for. And then the parental controls were completely a myth. Parents had no real control. It was impossible to effectively lock down a smartphone. I would hear story after story of parents who had no idea what their child was getting into on this app. Even innocuous apps that were like educational games had dangers, portals to the internet. I think parents aren't aware of all the in-app browsers. And so I had personally seen just how bad the parental controls were. And so I decided that I would write this book to parents because there wasn't one. And I wanted parents to both know why a smartphone free childhood was necessary. But more than anything else, and what the book focuses on, is trying to actually give parents the practical steps for how this is possible. From interviewing just dozens of families who have done this, I wanted to give parents their tips for success, how they had been able to do this, navigate through the teen years, and raise their kids free of smartphones. And so that in the book is in a nutshell, that's the book I wrote.
All right. Okay. Well, so let's get into it because I have kids, and in particular a teenage. My God, God help me, teenage daughter. And so I'm sure I'm going to tell you stuff you've heard a million times, but probably this is also the audience. So I'll just tell you my story. We were very defensive or reluctant to let her have any phones or things of that nature. At first, we bought her a flip phone because she can use that for emergencies, but there's no like apps, blah 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 blah. But eventually we realized that, and again, preteen teen girl, if if she's gonna have a social life, she needs to be in the group chats. If she has to have a social life, she needs to be in the group chats. She asked her for a phone. She has excellent grades, which is extremely frustrating because she's like, if I'm first in my class, will you buy me an iPhone? And it's like, okay. And And so eventually, we did a lot of research. My wife is a total computer gadget nerd. And so we bought her so we chose Apple because it has the best, we thought, parental controls, blah blah blah. And so she has screen time limits, she has limits on what apps she can install, da 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 da. And we are careful about not letting her use it too much. Just before I was, because it's the summer holiday, so I got a request. I want more time. It's like, no, you have to. You still haven't finished doing the laundry or whatever it was. Anyway, so why am I a terrible parent?
Oh, I'm not trying to judge your individual decisions, but I will say I first I'll acknowledge the difficulties in resisting the smartphones, and this is part of some of the solutions I try to address in my book, is why parents need to band together, because it's difficult for individual parents to say my kid's going to be the only one not on a
Yes.
smartphone. So I
Yeah. Oh, and
really,
her school is very good. Like, smartphones are banned in her
oh,
school.
that's great.
They have to be in the backpack, and like there's a very clear rule. Like, if we see a phone, we're just gonna take it.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, all of the kids in her class are in the group chats, and therefore, if you don't participate in that, you're a social outcast, and it's very hard for especially a preteen girl to be a social outcast.
Yes, no, I understand the peer pressures and
I'm
the
not
peer.
defensive at all, by the way, as you can.
No, it's fine. I
Well,
talked to.
I'm just joking around because I think most of the viewers
Oh,
of
yeah.
this are going to be somewhere like this, and so I'm not asking. Joking aside, I'm not asking you to judge me, but okay. So why are screen time limits
Yeah.
not good enough?
Oh, no, 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 sure.
Why?
And I
No,
was just gonna
seriously, I want
answer
to
your
know.
question by saying, like, I would wanna hear more about if you've seen just any behavior changes even in your daughter, despite the time limits, despite the parental controls, if you feel like if you feel like she's drawn to the smartphone, if you feel like she's asking for more time. Because my premise in the book, what I try to explain, and listen, adults are not immune from these effects, is that it's highly addictive. And
Yes.
even a small amount of time per day, just it really does make us crave more time. And I try to explain the brain science to people, that it releases these dopamine bursts in our brain,
Yeah.
these hits of pleasure. But dopamine doesn't produce lasting satisfaction. And in fact,
Yes.
then once you log off, your brain goes into a dopamine deficit state, which is meant to incentivize you to do the activity again. And so these kids, even when they're off the devices, their brain is in this kind of constant craving state. And more studies are coming out. The University of North Carolina had one that showed kids who were habitually checking their phones, checking social media, over time showed divergent brain development. What happened is their reward pathways in the brain became more sensitive to social media and the cues for social media. They became,
Yeah.
the addiction term is sensitization. They became more
Yeah.
sensitized to
Yeah.
that type of reward. And the other side effect of that is also then desensitization to other natural pleasures in the real world. And I will say, I think one of the dangers of smartphones is it's sometimes also difficult to see like the harms overnight. You're like, you hand your kid a phone, you're like, it doesn't seem so bad. But it's the cumulative changing of the brain over time, and then their gradual, even kind of loss of interest in real world things, because it actually doesn't produce as much pleasure. And even you're saying about the group chats, like the virtual world becomes more real for kids than the real world. And so I just try to explain for parents, the addictive design really just undermines this premise
Right.
of screen time limits. I mean, we don't, any addictive substance, we're not like, oh, okay, it's okay if my kid has a little bit of fentanyl today. We don't approach. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but I think when we use that analogy, like if we think about other inherently addictive products, we don't put like time limits on them for kids. We just actually don't allow children to use those things. And I'm trying to make the case that smartphones and social media, particularly because of how immersive, interactive they are, how constant the dopamine hits are, that they are that addictive, and that we have to put those types of screens more in the category of fentanyl than sugar, because I think we've often just treated screens like sugar. Okay, yeah, bad if it's too much, but okay in moderation. And with the smartphone and social media in particular, I'm really trying to encourage parents to wait as close to adulthood as possible, to allow their kids' brains to develop as much as they can without the phones, and to form their habits without them, to allow their brains to really develop as best as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go over the science, go over the evidence. Make me want to. As soon as we get off the recording, I'm gonna go in her bedroom, which is right there, and like take the phone and smash it with a hammer. No, no, but like, okay, so explain the evidence. Explain why. And I like the analogy. Like most people would say, it's like sugar. It's it.
Mhm.
Yes, not too much, but if it's a little once in a while, that's not the biggest deal in the world. And
Yeah.
that's a good analogy. So explain to me the evidence why I and parents in general should believe that it's more like fentanyl than sugar.
Okay. All right, we're going to go for a little bit of even a deeper dive in the brain science. So, brain scans are showing that the parts of the brain that are activated, and then even over time, what they look like, the brains of users of social media, the scans actually look like the brains of heavy drug users. The same changes have structurally happened in the brain. Again, so that's like what is happening on a structural level in the brain is actually the same as using a highly addictive drug. The other point is that what happens is kids, especially at around age 10, their brains start going through another critical period of development called pruning and myelination. Pruning is that we actually our brain starts to cut out and reduce neural connections that we're not really using. It tries to become more efficient, to build the brain, to strengthen, and that's the myelination, is that the nerve fibers actually become coated in this like white substance called myelination, and so it makes up the white matter of the brain. That white matter increases connectivity between certain parts of the brain and actually speeds up the firing of the neurosignals. So these processes are happening in tandem, and what they're finding is with kids who are on screens using smartphones, social media, their white matter is reduced, the connections between their prefrontal cortex and the reward center of the brain, which means their ability actually to exert self control and impulse control, to be able to say, I've really been using social media too much, is actually being stunted. Like the fully formed develop of that, the brakes to kind of put brain brakes on your brain is being inhibited. So they're seeing reduced white matter between the cortex and the reward center. They're also seeing a lot more white matter in the reward center. Those pathways are becoming like hardwired in the brain towards the stimuli that screens provide, which means it will always be more addictive and alluring and appealing to the brain. So the sensitization can be a lasting structural change in the brain, which means you're always going to be a little bit more compulsively drawn to those things, and kind of puts the brain again in more of a state of constantly craving that
Right.
particular stimulus. And then the last point is the gray matter and the cortical thickness in the cortex part of the brain, the judgment center, is reduced. So it's less. And so that's what I'm talking about, is that the brain is changing. It really works to become more efficient. And so if we are underusing our prefrontal cortex, that there's actually reduction in the structure of the brain, which, so what they see is over time, it leads to greater impulsivity, less self control, emotional regulation, poor judgment. And the brain, that cortex isn't fully developed until age 25. And so this is why scientists are trying to explain, for a kid on social media or a smartphone, it's all gas and no brakes. And it's actually inhibiting their ability to develop the brakes that they need to exert that kind of self control as an adult. And so it's not an exaggeration to say. You sometimes hear people say, "Oh, the phones are rewiring the brain." They actually are on a structural level. And the last thing I'll say is we see this mental health crisis. The mental health crisis is related to these changes. So when the brain gets used to these artificially high levels of dopamine while they're on the platforms and then you log off, it goes into a dopamine deficit state and you actually experience less ability to feel pleasure from real life things, the normal kind of mundane things of life, and it can put people into a depressive state. And so we see these spiking rates of depression, anxiety, self harm, suicide. The CDC found last year that 1 in 3 high school girls in the United States considered suicide. Like one
Yeah,
in
no,
three.
the mental health numbers are insane.
Mental health numbers are insane. And I mean, Jonathan Haidt, Gene Twenge, others have documented this isn't just correlation, this is causation. We've ruled out the other factors. And if you even just study the brain science, it's an explanatory variable to see, oh, what's happening in the brain is actually contributing to these mental health symptoms that we're seeing in the kids. And so, for all those reasons, I would just really urge parents to proceed with great caution. Obviously, my book holds out my proposed solution, which is just opting out of smartphones and social media entirely. And I really actually want parents to think it's possible because I think most parents are like, probably same in your boat, just I don't really want to give the smartphone, but it starts to feel like this inevitability as the pressures ramp up. And I'm kind of trying to give parents an escape plan for how to handle those pressures. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I walk parents through that it actually is possible and the barriers may not be as big as you think. There are lots of parents doing this, increasingly greater numbers of parents. So, like, let's band together and change the culture on this to protect all of our kids. And so we can talk through more specifics, but I will say the greatest piece of advice I give parents is there are better alternative phones available that allow your kids to call and text that don't have an internet browser, that don't have social media apps, don't have YouTube, all the kind of addictive gaming apps that really allow them to start to learn to use a phone as a tool for calling and texting people, but without all the immersive, addictive apps. And so it's just a lot easier for parents to be able to protect their kids with that type of alternative phone to the smartphone. So that's been my new piece of recommendation is just delay the phone as long as possible. And then when you do feel like your child is independently moving around, you need to be in touch with them, opting for a non-smartphone alternative as their first phone.
Yeah. Well, that's what we did, except, eventually we gave up. Okay, so I'm going to keep playing devil's advocate.
That's fine.
Again, not defensive at all. So okay, so those studies were on kids that use smartphones like half an hour a day, less than an hour a day, or because I fully buy that what you're describing is real or extremely possible it for a child who's just like staring at a screen constantly, and we know that there are families where they are staring at a screen constantly, uh but there are also families where the kid has a phone but he's got screen time limits and so on and so forth. So everything you described, those studies break down by the amount of usage and the regularity of usage?
Yeah, I would have to go into the weeds. I kind of summarized at a high level, probably like, I don't know, 20 different studies that I've read, and a lot of them have overlapping results. I
Yeah.
will say a couple things. So, the first is obviously the amount of time, like, there have been separate studies done that show like the amount of time obviously increases the risk of these effects. And even on the mental health front, the amount of time can increase the risk for depression or anxiety. So it's not completely separated from time. But I will say other studies have examined just, okay, kids who are frequently checking social media during the day, not saying that they're spending hours on it, but just
Right.
the habitual checking behavior,
Right.
which
Okay.
doesn't even mean that you're going into the app. You're just checking. Did you get a new
Right.
notification or a like
Right.
on the phone?
Right.
habitual checking behaviors is the like thing that this University of North Carolina studied, not looking at time spent on the
Yeah, yeah,
app.
yeah.
Just, and that's what they found, the divergent brain development where kids' reward pathways became overly sensitive to social rewards was just from the checking behavior. And I tell parents, I'm like, even if you set a time limit, Instagram 30 minutes a day, it means they could still check the app like 100 times that day. Like they're not necessarily going into it and spending the 30 minutes on it. But because of the design of the app, it incentivizes your brain to constantly check it. You want to know if you got a new follower, has anyone liked your post, like what's going on. And so that what it in the kind of behavior that it induces, and then that behavior over time changes the structure of the brain. So, and that's separate from just how much time you're spending. The other thing I will say is, Jonathan Haidt has explained in some of the research studies that there are just bigger kind of network effects, that it's not just an individual dose relationship, but just
Right.
that it's a changing of the social environment. And obviously that's difficult for individual parents to change, which is part of why I'm advocating for collective solutions at schools, like banning the phones, or the policy solutions, or just parents finding each other. And so it's not as simple as just the amount of time spent. There's more complicating factors, just like the habitual checking behaviors it induces, the changes in social dynamics. And I was forgetting my last point. I was just going to say that, the last point is just also there have been studies just looking at when someone got the age of first smartphone and then their mental health outcomes as adults. And
Mm,
not about the amount of time spent, but just like what age they got the
mm,
smartphone. And the younger the age of first smartphone, the worse mental health outcomes as young adults. In particular, the measure that decreased the most with getting a smartphone older was suicidality. That kids who got their smartphone closer to age 18 rather than age 6 or 7 or 8 actually struggled significantly less with suicidal thoughts. So that's also just trying to look at what's the impact over time cumulatively of having a smartphone, especially at a younger age.
okay. Damn it. That all sounds very convincing. Okay, so just curiosity, just asking about these studies. Do we know what it is exactly? Because so the smartphone is many different things, right? There's the screen itself, and one of the things that I believe is that the light in your eyes creates like this physical reaction,
No, it
physiological
does. Yeah, yeah,
reaction.
yeah.
Because I have a Kindle, and it's a totally different feeling because you don't have light blasted in your eyes, which we didn't evolve for. So there's the physical screen aspect. There's the social media aspect where you read all these stories about like mob like behavior, bullying that sort of never ends because it's always on your phone and it's like a mob of people in the group chats, da da da. So is it the social media? Is it games? Of course, when it comes to boys, there's the whole porn thing, which is like its own separate thing, but obviously it's connected. um do we know, do we have studies that sort of try to break it down? And b, if we don't know, do you have like a hunch? Do you have your I'm sure you probably have a theory, even if it's not proven.
Yeah. Okay, a couple things. So, I think it's actually maybe difficult to disentangle all the kind of aspects of the smartphone, maybe in scientific studies, but I can give you some of my theories based on research and how the smartphone just works and what symptoms it kind of induces in us. Social media is obviously like the most kind of harmful because of all the things that you mentioned. I mean, it literally teens hold themselves out to their peers for judgment. All of their relationships are built on metrics like likes and followers, which is like inherently addicting. I mean, this is again like it preys exactly on the brain vulnerabilities
Yeah.
that between the ages of 10 to 12, our like dopamine receptors multiply to make us more wired for social feedback and social rewards from our peers, and is a normal process of development that's supposed to help us form more friendships like outside of our families. And instead, social media comes in at just that right time and literally just hijacks the kind of brain vulnerabilities by providing that type of social feedback, but through the online world. And I explained like kids are getting dopamine through the screen, through the social media, but they're not getting oxytocin, which only comes from real life relationships, from eye contact, physical touch. And oxytocin is like the kind of lasting happiness hormone. It bonds us with other humans, it makes us feel trust and like genuine friendship. And so kids are more connected than ever through social media, yet we have this loneliness epidemic because they're not actually
Yeah.
forming quality friendships. So anyway, that's a kind of side tangent, which is another point that when parents talk to me about their kids feeling left out because they're not on the social media apps, I'm like, the friendships being formed through social media are not very deep and rich. And like, if you can instead try to help your kids spend time with their friends in real person, like the more that you can get them together with their friends in real life, the more of an antidote it is to the kind of shallowness of social media. So that's a side tangent on just your point on friendships. But then the screen itself, the interface of the screen, is also really addictive, but also it elicits a response in our brain that's unnatural. So this doctor in her practice, she studies kid or she has kids come in with autism, ADHD, and what she was finding is in a lot of her patients, just having them do a 30-day digital detox from all interactive screens, video games, smartphones, social media, tablets, that for many patients, it completely eliminated their symptoms. And for patients who did have this condition, it cut them in half. And so she said she has termed this condition where kids have poor focus, behavioral difficulties, struggles paying attention, impulsivity, mood swings, sleep disturbances, kind of this whole category of symptoms she now terms electronic screen syndrome. And what she explains is that the stimulation through the screen actually puts the brain into like a fight or flight response mode. It really activates the amygdala, which is in our reward center, and it
Hmm.
stimulates the amygdala to release adrenaline and cortisol and dopamine. And she said what happens is that cortisol and adrenaline is meant to be released in like physical activity and physical movement. It's a stress response that
Yes.
cumulatively the screens are inducing this stress response. But then when it's not released, it builds up in the brain and it leads to these dysregulations because she said when you get this fight or flight response, the amygdala takes over and your frontal cortex just kind of shuts down. Like it's meant to save you from, dangerous situations. Like here's your adrenaline, like get out of there. And so this is being stimulated by interactive screens. And she says it's not just using screens too much, even the regular use of screens over time, this stress response, like it accumulates in the brain. And so it manifests itself in these physical and physiological and psychological symptoms in kids, and that just taking screens away for 30 days allows the brain to reset, to come back to a normal level of balance and homeostasis, and allows a child's nervous system to kind of re-regulate. And so that, to your point, is an effect of really any interactive screen, because of just the nature of these constant little dopamine hits and bursts and the interaction with this like bright thing in our eyes, like all of it is inducing that kind of stress response. And she again cautions parents like this isn't just kids who are excessively using their screens 2 hours or more a day. This is just from someone who's been using it over time. That stress response accumulates in the brain. So what we see in
I'm sorry,
kids
what were you saying? I was looking at my phone.
just it kids have really malfunctioning kind of like stress systems in the brain from screens. The last thing I'll say on the eye point is I spoke with an ophthalmologist for my book, and she is now seeing 8 and 9-year-olds coming into her practice who are struggling with chronic dry eye, which is a condition normally seen in 70 and 80-year-olds where your eye glands start to dry up over time. Kids staring at screens, she said, are not blinking enough, and they don't even realize they're doing it, but the
Right.
lights, whatever it
Oh
triggers,
my.
they're not blinking. Blinking is really important because it actually has these eye glands release oil that then lubricates the eye, but when you
Okay, I'm
don't
gonna tell my wife not to watch this podcast because like she's gonna She
I
will.
mean, it is like it's kind of scary stuff, but they
She's gonna go full Uncle Ted. Uh,
yeah, these kids' eye glands actually dry up
oh,
because they're
that's
not
awful.
blinking.
That's so horrible.
And you
I knew there
don't
was an epidemic
yeah.
of nearsightedness among children, and it's definitely. I mean, it's not just linked to because we've had this issue as well. Uh, it's not directly linked to screens. It's the fact that if you live in an urban environment, you're not looking at the horizon,
Oh,
and the
interesting.
act of looking at the horizon is like a workout for your eyes. And
Wow.
so if
Interesting.
you're constantly in an
Right.
environment where you don't have like a point far away to look at,
Interesting.
um, then your eye loses its ability, or the ability we gets worse to look far away. And so I mean the numbers on like 8-year olds in Japan who need glasses, it's doubled in like 10 years or something like that, like really weird. um uh okay, but I did not know about the dry eye thing, which is even scarier.
Yeah,
Okay.
because if you lose those glands, they just don't come back. So these kids now have to externally basically lubricate
Oh,
their
really?
eyes the rest of their lives.
So it's
And
for the rest of their lives.
yeah, because otherwise, scar tissue will build up on your eyes if they're not lubricated, which can ultimately like lead to blindness if it's untreated. And so an 8-year-old starts out their life basically with a chronic health condition that they have to constantly manage so that they don't go blind. So it's like it's pretty important to pay attention to.
Holy, holy crap. Okay. Okay, you're radicalizing me right now. Um, okay, you sold me. Okay, next step. So what do I do? How how do I do this without my children hating me?
No,
Uh,
yes, I know it's challenging. Well, and I was going to say even to your earlier point, I think sometimes it's difficult for us to see the impact on a daily basis of our kids using a screen, but what I really recommend to every parent is to try a 30-day detox. Even if
okay,
you're not sure you're going to keep this up long term, it
right.
will be beneficial for your child. I mean, summer is a great time to say, "Hey, for
Yes.
30 days, we're doing no smartphone. We're doing no social media. We're really doing no interactive screens because I want to help your brain and your nervous system re regulate. And I want you to actually see what the experience is like not being on your phone. It can be a really helpful thought exercise, especially in teenagers, to say, we're going to do this. And, we're going to commit to 30 days. I think any family can commit to doing something for 30 days. It's time limited. And the 30 days has a science to it. It gives time for the brain to really re regulate and the nervous system to kind of calm down from these stimulations. And so I explain kind of how to do a detox in my book, where you make a plan and try to make it a fun activity that, like, we're going to do all these fun things not on the screens together. And I also, like, for older kids, like, I want you to keep a journal and I want you to like notice things. Like, what are you noticing about yourself? Because honestly, like, teens are very insightful. They're like, wow, I didn't realize how addicted I was to it. Like, just going these 30 days, like, the first couple of days, I was like, whoa, this feels so weird not having my phone on me or like not checking it all the time. So I think that can even just be, especially with older kids, a very helpful just conversation starter of like, do you notice these effects like on yourself? And they often do. And then some families, like, they just, I mean, a lot of the families I spoke to, they just keep going because they said after those 30 days, they were like, this is so much better. And I didn't even expect to see these changes in my kids. And again, like, the subtle kind of influences of the smartphone and social media over time are maybe hard to observe, but these families say, like, going these 30 days without the screens, they were like, I felt like my kids' personality really came back, their interest in things in life. Like, it's sometimes easier to observe the effects by just taking it away and then seeing like, wow, they're so much more engaged in real life. And families have done this even with teens with smartphones. And again, they're not saying it's necessarily easiest, but that it really was the best thing for their child and for their family. And particularly with teens, these parents emphasized if you're taking away the smartphone, which feels kind of like the mile marker to adulthood these days, and
Mm,
feels like this immense privilege, then you have to replace it with some like very significant real world freedoms and privileges. And so one family, they gave their a 17-year-old a smartphone, but they said within like a week, they were like, it had completely
this is
morphed
not
his
working.
behavior. Like they could just tell, like, he is constantly drawn to this thing. And they're like, okay, we regret this decision. And the dad was like, this is not necessarily a parenting decision I'd recommend of like give your kid a smartphone for a week and then be like, whoops, we regret that decision. But he said they really saw it as necessary and they had conversations with him about it. And instead, they replaced it by offering him the use of a family truck. And that was like a big thing for him to feel like as a
Right,
17-year-old kid,
right,
he could
right,
drive this truck. And he started a business, like a moving business with his brother. He made a lot of money that summer. It was really good for his confidence
right,
and like
right.
gave him just a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment. And afterwards, at the time they were like he resented the decision. They were like it kind of felt like hell for a couple weeks because of how angry he was at us. But over time, like he actually saw the difference for himself and he told his parents he's like it was weird like the power it had over me. Like even they said as they got closer to giving him the phone, knowing he was getting it, it was like this thing he was like drawn to. They
Yeah,
saw like the compulsive effect. So
yeah,
anyway, now he's going off to college and he told his dad, he's like, yeah, I'm not really sure if I'll get a smartphone or not. They're kind of expensive. And I saw the kind of effects it had on me, even just like looking forward to getting one and then having it for a week, he could see just how drawn he was to it. And what they did instead is they gave him a non-smartphone that still had GPS on it. It was like called the Bark phone. I mean, there's a lot of these kind of hybrid. They're not like a
yeah,
total
yeah.
dumb flip phone. Like it actually looks like a smartphone. It just doesn't have internet, social media, other things on it. So he could still text his friends and be in group text and he could still, have a GPS to navigate, drive his car. And so they said that was a much better kind of compromise solution for him because there were some genuine tools he really felt like he needed, like a GPS, but without the kind of addictive aspects of the smartphone. So that's just one story. And I want parents to know like
It's a very good story.
it's just well the message is it's just like it's never too late to reverse course. I think like I don't think we do this really in any other area of parenting. Like when we find out new information about something that's like harmful for our kids, we don't like keep giving it to them. But for some
Yeah,
reason, the social pressures towards the tech, I talk to parent after parent, like, well, I already gave my kid a smartphone, so it's too late. And I'm like, no, it's actually the opposite. Like, you still have some years where you can help your child reform their habits without the smartphone and enter adult life without an addiction or dependence on it. And so I just think we as parents have to be, and I'm not saying it's not without challenge, but again, I kind of walk through how to overcome these hurdles in my book, but that we have to be willing, I think, to just, yeah, like question our decisions a little bit more, which is hard. It's hard to like examine that, but just ask ourselves, like, is this really best for my kid and for our family? And if it's not, just saying like, okay, what's kind of keeping me from really trying to make a change? And that's why I just recommend starting with the 30-day digital detox, because I think the most powerful thing is to see the results for yourself. And it's not something I can describe and it will look different in every family, but just actually trying it out gives you a taste of what that could look like.
that's fascinating. Okay, so well, I mean, that's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. So great segue. It's okay. So alternatives. So this is one of the things your book discusses. So give us more ideas for alternatives because I can tell you if I give my daughter a truck, she's not gonna. That's not gonna do it for her. Also, 13
Yeah.
year olds are not allowed to drive trucks in France, except in the countryside, but nobody talks about it. Uh,
Yeah, and you're talking about like the real life responsibilities, activities,
yeah,
pursuits, like what do we trade the screens for?
yeah,
Yeah. Um It's a good question. So I think just as much as possible, like particularly for teens, just trying to give them more freedoms to just go hang out with their friends in person. I mean, not being helicopter parents. Like let them bike to the local park or the movie theater with their friends. Because I think again, like what they're really looking for through social media is that friendship and social connection. And so actually encouraging them to go hang out with their friends in person or being the people to have friends over to your house. I had lots of parents say, like, we became the kind of party house in the sense that they just tried to host the social stuff for their teens. Like, they would get a bonfire pit to have in the backyard and say, yeah, like come over. This mom said, I'd buy like the fun junk food and my son would host these poker nights with his friends and it was really fun. And so I think trying to provide your kids rich social life experiences by giving them more freedoms to hang out with their friends, trying to even take a little bit more initiative as a parent to be willing to host kids at your house and kind of provide that substitute. This mom said it was even powerful for the kids who had smartphones because they say, okay, you can come over, all the phones go in that basket over there, and then just have fun. And so I think for a lot of those families, they said that was just really important because what the kids were looking for is really those friendships. And so helping to provide those in real life was really a powerful antidote that kind of made them realize like it's not great on social media or smartphones. Like the connections are just really shallow and that actually the real thing we're looking for, like experiencing that was a very helpful alternative substitute that really kind of exposed that the social media was kind of a cheap substitute for
Yeah.
what the real life relationships could look like. So again, I think it will really depend on your context, but a lot of these families mentioned, giving teens more access to a car to go drive to a friend's house or a bike, or just saying like if they wanted to have friends over, just being more willing to be like, yeah, sure, like come have your friends over. So trying to provide them more opportunities for a social life in the real world, free of phones as much as possible, was really powerful. For younger kids too, a lot of families describe just like letting their kids take on more adult-like responsibilities, like
Yeah.
helping them have first jobs, like babysitting in the neighborhood, mowing lawns. For some families, it was like getting a pet that was like the child's responsibility to take care of. No, seriously, like these families were like, you can get the dog.
Oh, no, it's great. I'm laughing because we have 2 dogs and 2 cats, so,
Yeah, no, and
we're
like
we're
the
not
parents
we're not gonna get another one right away.
but, and then another mom was explaining they, like, let their nine-year-old daughter, like, take over the weekly grocery ordering, like, it was her
Ooh,
job to go through the pantry and fridge and write down the things they needed to
right,
replace,
right,
and then it was her job to, like, do it, and so I think and that felt really fun,
right,
like, to get
right,
to
right,
act
right.
more like an adult, it
Yes.
was
Yes,
very
you have
reward
more
and
responsibilities.
yeah, and it's rewarding because then you actually work hard at something and then you see the fruit of that and it incentivizes you to kind of keep doing those things. Another mom was saying like this is it's I think you kind of have to embrace messy parenting if you're keeping your kids off screens. And by that I mean it's obviously easier to just like let them sit on a phone on the couch, but it has all these costs we're talking to. But this mom said, her daughter was interested in baking. And so she went to the library and like checked out all these baking cookbooks. And she was like, honestly, it was not like, it was kind of a lot of a mess. Like she just took over the
Right,
kitchen
right,
and there's
right,
like
right,
flour
right.
everywhere, but we're just like letting her experiment and it's like really good for her. But I have to embrace a little bit more mess and chaos in my own house. And I think, so anyway, I would just encourage parents to try to like foster and fuel real life pursuits that your kids might be interested in. And then, particularly, taking initiative, energy, time to allow your kids to really pursue real life socializing and whatever you can do as a parent to facilitate that.
I mean, that's great advice. Okay, so A, more real life socializing, and B, more responsibilities, and
Yeah.
C, less helicopter parenting.
Yes.
Those sound like good advice regardless
Yeah,
of the
absolutely.
smartphone situation. All right, let's talk about policy now because your book does have a policy section at the end. So how many big tech CEOs do we need to hang? And are we doing it next week or the week after that?
Oh my goodness.
Uh,
These are, I
Sorry,
mean,
Katie Vance is not yet president.
yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I mean, I know it's a provocative question, but in all seriousness, these companies are terrible. I mean, they have taken no steps to protect kids. They
Yeah,
won't. They have no legal accountability to do so, and it's against their business incentives. And that's what
yeah,
people have to realize. Like child protection is not in line with their business model, which is extract as much user time, attention, and data as possible. They want to actually addict children because the younger you can get someone using your product, the longer you can profit off of them over the course of their lifetime. And so the problem has been, and I think it's difficult if you don't really understand all the laws, especially in the United States, of why this has been the case. But most of the ways we hold businesses accountable in the US is through litigation. If you make a
yes,
bad product that harms consumers, you're going to get sued for it. And
yeah,
that threat of litigation compels companies to design their products with safety in mind. However, with the internet industry, Section 230, the law that governs the internet in the US, which the original purpose and intent of that law make kind of intuitive sense. You weren't, it means that the companies aren't liable
yeah,
for third party content hosted on their platform. Well, it's been way over expanded by the courts to essentially immunize these companies for anything that's even their own wrongdoing, like your design features, your algorithms are causing these harms to kids, and they've just basically had complete immunity. And with that immunity, then like the harms have only grown and accelerated because there has been no accountability, no kind of checking force on their
right, right.
behavior. So that is why we have the current state of affairs that we do. So I've been very engaged on policy solutions for a couple of reasons. I mean, the first I mentioned is unfortunately, not all the harms of social media are individual. It does create group level
Yeah,
harms. Jonathan Haidt calls these network effects, where even a couple of teens using social media can really impact the social environment for all the kids, and that even just it just changes the social dynamics, and kids can even experience some of these mental health harms from social media like secondhand. It's almost like secondhand smoke. Like they can feel left out, lonely, and depressed even if they're not on social media because of how it changes the group dynamics. And so and then the pressures that we mentioned towards individual parents to allow their kids on these things, like this is a classic kind of collective action problem,
yeah,
and laws can be really helpful. And schools can too. We talked about, schools going phone free. That's a huge step to help parents, but also there is a role for the law to play. So what I've been engaged in the United States the last 4 years is trying to help policy solutions that will back parents up on the front lines and serve to try to help protect all children. At the federal level, have been focused on bills that would just open these companies up to more legal liability, to say that they have to be responsible for mitigating certain objective harms to kids, or else they can be sued. And then on the state level, obviously it's states on their own, it's kind of difficult to impact maybe that higher level change, but there's lots of things that states can do. And so a lot of these states have now passed parental consent laws for social media, because believe it or not, the current status quo is just any kid anywhere can just check a box and enter a birth date and create a social media account. And
yeah,
so even if a parent is doing all they can to say you're not getting on social media, I mean, they can borrow a friend's phone or computer and just all too easily just enter a birth date. There's no age enforcement
right,
whatsoever. And
right,
then,
right.
and they entered this whole host of terms and services, agreeing to all these things, the data collection, all this stuff, just without a parent's involvement. And so that would just actually put parents back in the driver's seat over whether or not their kids get on social media. And then the last thing I've worked on is related to pornography websites, which is
Right.
trying to have age verification for porn websites. 24 states have passed those laws. And in the United States, we just had a huge victory 2 weeks ago from the Supreme Court, which upheld the law at issue in that case, Texas's law, as constitutional. And the court applied intermediate scrutiny, which was huge. And it basically just said states need more flexibility to be able to regulate in this area, to be able to write laws that fulfill their compelling government interest of protecting kids from online obscenity and balance the free speech rights of adults. And so I think that actually opens up a lot more possibilities for how states can address, particularly protecting kids from online pornography, going forward. And so those are just a handful, but I think making sure that the porn sites themselves have to age restrict content, helps every parent, because now some child can't just pull up a porn website on a smartphone and stick it in my kid's face. Like, we need to have some common denominator, solutions. And so that is what I'm trying to do on the policy front, is open up more litigation against these bad companies, put parents back in the driver's seat of their children's online experiences, and then, yeah, age restrict the really bad stuff like pornography websites. And my next battle is I'm really trying to age restrict social media completely out of childhood as well. I think similar, like Australia has now banned social media for ages 16 and under, just trying to put a little bit higher of a ceiling for like when you get on, just to again solve for that collective action problem. Now parents don't have to fight a battle in Australia. It's just, oh, this is a non-option until you're 16. And the same way we've age restricted other technologies that are dangerous for kids to operate, like motor vehicles or firearms, or if you treat it like the dangerous substance it is, we have restrictions on alcohol, tobacco, trying to similarly advocate for raising the age of social media. So those are the policy things I'm working on.
That's cool. I on Policy Sphere, which is the policy news website associated with this podcast.
Yeah.
We have a series called Modest Proposals, which is totally unrealistic policy proposals. Um,
I love it.
and one of the modest proposals was essentially to have a separate internet for every age group. And so after we pass this law, which we'll do any day now, basically every internet connected device sold in the United States would be connected to one specific internet at the hardware level.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
so
Yeah.
there's one internet for, let's say, ages 8 to 10, then there's another one for 10 to 13, and then there's another one for 13 to 16, and then there's another one for 16 to 18, and then there's one for 18 and everybody else. And so the devices would be different, the services would be different, the websites would be different, the information would be different, everyone would have like a different Wikipedia. There would be no, you wouldn't have to worry about some creep on the internet. If an adult wants to access age restricted internet, there has to be like a special reason, like he's an educator, every keystroke is logged. And you know, actually, it would be a pretty good proposal. And one of the arguments is that it would create lots of business opportunities because people would start to design devices specifically for certain ages. They would design websites for specific ages. You look at, there are social networks for kids and so on and so forth, and they have like a pedophile scandal every 6 months. And
Mm.
so this is this is obviously not good for business. But there are, like in theory, if it was safe, it was designed for them. Some sort of like online age appropriate game that kids can play. That's not a bad thing. So anyway, that's our modest proposal. You can talk to it. You can talk about it with your congressman.
Yeah,
Um,
no, thank you for flagging that. I think these are good creative ideas, and I think we need more thinking along those lines in this space, even if it seems like maybe not immediately achievable, of like what the end goal should be. And I like what you're describing, because I do think the current state of affairs is just, here's this totally adult internet that we just throw kids into
yeah,
and then
yeah,
try to cut off certain things.
yes,
And it's
yeah,
just, it's like the Wild
and it
West.
doesn't
So
work. Yeah,
it doesn't
yeah.
work.
Yeah, I mean, another thing along those lines is I'm a huge fan of e-paper technology, and it's
Mm,
gotten really, really good.
hmm.
And this is not even for kids. This is for adults. Like I wish, for work, for example, like if you're working, like you don't need video 99% of the time. You don't need things like that. Like you can work on an e-paper screen. Like you can show
Yes.
spreadsheets and websites and email.
Yes.
Uh, and like the 8 hours a day staring at a screen for adults is also not good.
It's
Like
not
the
good.
brains are fully formed, so it's different. And but uh, like having work computers use e-paper screens, I think would be a massive change. But it's it,
I
it
love that. Oh, it would be much better for our bodies using
yes,
e-paper screens for sure. Yeah, no,
yeah,
I'm hoping even the conversation around kids leads to better solutions as well for adult use because we're not completely immune from the harmful impacts of these things as well. So,
yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I was somewhat skeptical going in, but you've done a really good job convincing me. I'm going to go and smash all of my children's devices. They're going to love it. Um, okay, so we end every podcast with a traditional question. And that question is, recommend a book. It can be any book, fiction, nonfiction, contemporary, old, but it can't be a book in your area of expertise.
Yep. Okay. Just a book to read.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I know you're
Any book, but it can't be about big tech. It can't be about, no Jonathan Haidt. I know you were going to go there. No.
no, I was like, wow, okay, I've got a lot of books in the tech space that I read. Just a book to
Yeah, that's why it's
recommend.
interesting because otherwise people will just recommend a book on what they're working on, but something else. Anything but something else.
Okay. This is actually it's a kind of a business related book. It's written by a business professor. It's called The Catalyst: How to
Okay.
Change Anyone's Mind. It is
Okay.
fascinating. And it's basically like how do you get people to change what they're doing or what they think? And um I read this book because in writing my book, I am trying to change people's mind. But this is not a
Right.
book about the tech space. This is just a business
Right, right, right.
professor. And it's actually it's really fascinating of kind of how you can convince someone to change what they're doing or to change their opinion on something. And so it's kind of like
That is
five
very
strategies.
interesting.
Fascinating book to read, very filled with examples. It's very interesting. A lot of it is like business products, like how do you get consumers to switch products, but then also like examples of hostage negotiators, like how do you get this person to like give up the hostages? So there's a lot of it's kind of I think a little bit of behavioral science and kind of business principles, but I find it really relevant even for my work in policy, where I'm engaged in a lot of debates trying to get people to change their mind on something. And then right now in my work with parents, trying to convince parents to change what they're doing on tech. So I think it's applicable to a lot of areas of life, but I learned a lot and I found it a fascinating, really quick read, honestly, because it was super interesting. So it's I'm trying to remember the author's name right now. I have it on my shelf, but it's called The Catalyst. It's by a business professor at University of Pennsylvania. I think
I'm
it's
sure people can find it.
yeah. Okay, well there you go.
Yeah,
That's
no,
my
great
recommendation.
answer. Very original. That's exactly why I asked this question. I always get interesting answers. All right, Claire Morell, thank you very much. Your book is The Tech Exit: A Practical Guide to Freeing Kids and Teens from Smartphones. It highly recommend. It will blow your mind and get you to rethink some of your life choices. Unfortunately, thank you very much. This was very interesting. Have a nice day.